What if we could have an interesting and engaging conversation where legacy meets philanthropy? Good morning. I have the pleasure to introduce you to Dominic Kalms this lovely morning. Dominique is the founder and chief executive officer of a new venture-backed FinTech company, Be Generous, which is revolutionizing how people donate to nonprofits through the advent of the first ever philanthropic credit product. Be Generous is backed by some of the top venture capitalists, banks, and institutional investors in the United States. Welcome, Mr. Kalms.
Thanks so much for having me today.
So to start out, what a marvelous idea. What were some of the present day problems that you saw? As well as I could say some of the future problems as we head into further inflation if we don't get creative.
Sure, yeah. So the philanthropic market in the United States is very, very, very big, first of all. So I like to sort of start off contextualizing how big the market is. People are really surprised when I tell them this, but last year, total donations to US-based nonprofits were just under $500 billion with a T. And so that means that Americans give away more than $1 billion every day in the United States. And 72% of giving, overall giving, comes from individuals like you and I. And so you can think about how big of a market that is. Not only is it $500 billion of donations, but there are about 1.7 million nonprofits in the United States, and the nonprofit industry employs about 10% of the American workforce. 1 out of every 10 Americans work for a nonprofit. So you have this huge, huge sector. The problem with philanthropy in the philanthropic sector is that it's highly inefficient and it's highly fragmented. And so what you have is that about 40% of all philanthropic donations come in the last quarter of the year or the last 3 months of the year. October, November, December. And so for the first 3 quarters of the year, nonprofits are struggling from a liquidity problem because the cash that they need to run the organizations and to run the programs doesn't really materialize until traditionally in the last couple of months of the year. And so a report was put out, I believe it was by CNN earlier this year or last year, that said that about half of all nonprofits today in the United States have less than 1 month of cash reserves on hand. And then GuideStar, which is a large charitable rating agency, put out another report that said, unless something is done to alleviate this liquidity problem, 4 out of 10 nonprofits may close in the next 3 years. So you're talking about a contraction of 40% of the market. Just imagine contracting 40% of the market that holds 10% of the American workforce and $3.8 trillion worth of assets and almost $500 billion a year worth of donations. It would be a calamity, not only for the economy, but for all the people that rely on nonprofits for social services, for food, for water, for shelter, for education, right? So the problem is a problem of liquidity and a problem of inefficiency. And at the same time as this problem's happening, the percentage of Americans who donate to charity and the average donation amount are actually at all-time lows today. So they're still very, very high. Most Americans do give to charity, over 70%, but that number is actually considerably lower than it was 10, 15 years ago. When those numbers hovered at, in the high 80s, low 90s, actually, in fact. So what you have is less people giving on average, giving less on average. So the problem has then developed on the charitable side. So the question is, how do you increase philanthropic giving when already American donors are saying, hey, we're tapped out, we don't have enough money to give, and we're going to give less? And so I really looked
I
at
just
this.
want to intrude for a second. I find it very interesting. So as the gas prices are going up and food prices are going up, and it's hitting many different stratas of the income levels within America, the working class, the middle class, the upper middle class, and so forth, it's very interesting because we saw in the pandemic, people stopped giving as much.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, people did stop giving. And giving is much like everything else in the economy. Giving is somewhat cyclical. It does have a relationship to the broader economic trends in society. When there are recessions, giving will remain flat. In some severe cases, giving can actually go down. We're running at about 8% inflation. That also hurts nonprofits considerably. So there's a really a perfect storm happening at the same time when the cost of living in the United States is going up. And ultimately, we will probably hit some form of a mild recession over the next couple of months. So the question is then, if people are giving less already and nonprofits are already having a liquidity problem, how do you bridge that gap? How do you fund nonprofits at a higher level without continuing to stress donors' wallets and bank accounts? Right. That's
their
the
lifestyle
question. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
they've got their mortgage to pay and they still want to take their vacation and so forth. Yes.
Right. Exactly. And so I started looking at this problem from the perspective of how financial technologies have addressed this problem in the e-commerce space, right? So you have similar dynamics in the e-commerce space. I mean, most people don't realize this, but the nonprofit space and the e-commerce space are virtually the same size market. The e-commerce market before COVID was about a $538 billion a year market, 2.2 million e-commerce stores, and roughly 210 million Americans purchase goods and services online every year in the United States. Compare that to the philanthropic space, $485 billion market, 1.7 million nonprofits in the United States, roughly 240 million Americans make donations every year in the United States. So they're very similar in size. And yet one of these markets is saturated with innovation and credit and lending products, and the other has nothing. And of course, I'm talking about the e-commerce market. If you look at all the innovation from technology companies in e-commerce, you can think of all the big companies that we know of in the technology space. They've all gone and they've innovated in this one market, and they've made it fundamentally easier for Americans, people around the world, to buy goods and services online. And a really big innovative product that was introduced about 10 years ago is buy now, pay later.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Like whether it's PayPal or eBay or anything, this is almost like modern day layaway, and yet it's got a positive ripple effect. Because I think one of the, and correct me if I'm wrong here, something about a 40% contraction in the economy if nobody did anything to change this.
Well, there would 40% of all nonprofits could go out of business within 3 years if this problem wasn't alleviated, which would be a true calamity for the country and for people that rely on nonprofits for all the help that they provide.
Yes. So here you are, and you went to some amazing schools in New York City, and you had an opportunity to work in some of those big financial houses, and yet you chose to go to Washington, D.C. So here's my second question for you. Why is it that you care? Was it that you saw the inefficiencies of government, or kind of what's the backstory?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in Asia. I was born in Hong Kong, and saw what I saw the world from a very young age. I then moved to Europe when I was 4 years old. And I got to really see the world from a very different perspective, different countries and continents that I really lived in. By the age of 10, I lived on 3 continents. I had lived in many countries. Now that I'm in my 30s, I've lived in 7 or 8 countries in my life. And I've probably visited 60 or 70 countries. So I've traveled extensively. So I've seen, I've seen, I guess, what true poverty can really do to a civilization, to a group of people, and it's really devastating. And I've also seen the effects of the lack of a social safety net in the United States, right? So people always ask me, why is the philanthropic sector so big in the United States, and why isn't there one of comparable size in Norway or Sweden, for example? Well, the answer is Norway and Sweden government provides a lot of the services that our social sector provides, right? And so in Norway and Sweden, they have a social safety net that helps people that fall through the cracks through a variety of programs, government programs, and so forth. In the United States, we don't have that. I'm not making a political statement. This is just a factual statement. We just don't have programs like that. And so a very big philanthropic market has had to, out of necessity, has sprung up to help the people that are falling through the cracks, to provide a lot of the social services that most of the time governments will provide in other countries. And so the reality is that I believe in the power of philanthropy in the United States. I've seen its impact up close. And because it's such a massive market and it's so highly inefficient, there's massive room for innovation, massive room for innovation. So it's really, I find it personally rewarding to be at the intersection of sort of profit and purpose, which is using private sector tools and private sector technology to create efficiencies in this massive, massive, inefficient, fragmented market. But B, I also believe in the promise of philanthropy. I fundamentally believe philanthropic efforts can help people in the United States, and I want to see the sector thrive. And so those are really the 2 reasons that I'm interested in this sector.
Yeah. So was it mother was the, what is it? Mother is the something, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes,
Was it just,
yeah.
you looked out there and you said, this isn't fair of what's going to, what's happening to these people, whether it's on domestic soil or abroad? Like, why is there this unnecessary pain?
Well, it's just that the government in the United States doesn't provide a lot of the social services that other countries have. And so by necessity, we have a big philanthropic sector that has sprung up to provide those services. The problem is the philanthropic sector is highly, highly fragmented and highly inefficient in many, many areas. And it really has not had extensive innovation like the private sector has. If you look at the private sector over the last 50 years, particularly the technology revolutions after, revolution after the 2000s, you've had massive innovation in FinTech, in banking, in e-commerce, in online transactions, in payment processing, in cryptocurrency, and digital currencies, in blockchain, and Web3. I could go on digital creation of tokens and assets. But in the philanthropic space, there has not been that same pace of innovation. And yet it holds 1/10 of our US workforce, holds almost $4 trillion worth of assets, and it's helping hundreds of millions of Americans in a variety of areas. And so how can we leave out such a critical part of our economy and our social fabric? How can we leave this sector out from the innovation revolution, let's say? And so I want to bring that to this massive space today.
That's lovely. That's really wonderful. So what is service to others mentality then?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too saintly. I mean, I run a private venture capital backed technology company, so I do fundamentally believe in the
In
promise of,
capitalism?
I do believe in capitalism, and I do believe in the promise of profit and purpose. I think those are not mutually exclusive. I don't think profit is a bad word. I think if you can do well by doing good, that's the dream. For me, that's the dream. For me personally,
But
I
no one
would
else
like
seemed
to.
to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but no one else seemed to have thought of this.
Well, this particular product, no, they didn't.
Okay.
But there's been other innovations in the philanthropic space. I wouldn't say anything sort of groundbreaking, but there's definitely other interesting platforms out there. And I happen to know a lot of the CEOs of those other platforms that are friends of mine and partners of mine. Yeah, this particular product, nobody had thought of that, which is where I was able to really innovate in this space and really build something truly, truly unique.
Which is very interesting also because I find that it's a win-win. The banks win. Yeah, I
Mhm.
almost wondered if it could be deemed a UCC 5 letter of credit, but maybe that's another conversation for another time.
We looked into that. There's a lot of interesting ideas around, can banks get credit under there's I'm blanking on the Consumer Lending Act, the CLA, and others. So there's a lot of complexity to that. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting discussion for sure. And for your viewers who don't know, we're talking about my company, Be Generous, on my hat right here, that we've created the first ever philanthropic credit product that allows somebody to donate now, pay later. So in the buy now, pay later space, people can buy now, pay later. We allow donors to donate now, pay later, in effect, allowing a donor to make a donation to a nonprofit. The nonprofit will receive your donation upfront right away in a lump sum. You're entitled to the full tax deduction for that donation from the nonprofit, and yet you pay $0 out of pocket today. And instead, you get to pay over time, over 3, 6, or 9 months, completely for free. There's no interest payments, there's no transaction fees, there's no hidden costs or late fees. And so what happens is the nonprofit receives your donation, so they have the full donation up front. You get the full tax deductible receipt, but you actually pay no money today, and you can pay it off over time completely for free. And so we see that the vast, vast, vast majority of people who use this product end up giving substantially more because they say to themselves, look, if I usually give $50 to my favorite nonprofit, I might now consider giving $10 a month for 10 months. If you do that, the nonprofit's actually going to receive $100 up front. The nonprofit actually books gross $100. You get a tax deduction for $100 as well, but you actually spend no money today and you can pay it off over 10 months at no cost to you. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and one of the things also that I found very unique is you picked up on the concept, which a lot of business people do, but not all Americans do, that a dollar now is better than a dollar 6 months from now. In other words, if they pay now in that lump sum, then that's better for the nonprofit.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we send, I mean, particularly in an inflationary environment like we're in now, if you give somebody a dollar now versus a dollar in a year from now, that dollar in a year from now is going to be worth almost 10% less. Right. So if I gave you $1,000 today, that is materially better than if I gave you $1,000 in a year from now. And so the fact that we send the donor's full donation to the nonprofit upfront and the nonprofit receives that money upfront is a significant value in general, but even more so in an inflationary environment today, because that means they get the full value of the money right now.
Yes, yes, very much so. And in our preamble, I did acknowledge you, and I want to do it publicly also right now. Sorry to put you on the spot, that I respect that you've taken up the sword and you're taking action in getting it done or seizing the initiative, because in the last few years, we've seen that many people can fall into depression or not leaning into the what's wanting to happen conversation. So I just want to provide public kudos that you said to yourself, okay, I've got a great idea. I've got the relationships and the connections. How can I have all the parties win? Not just in the macro for the nonprofits that participate, but in the macro economy, like before when we spoke about the 40% contraction, even if it's just within the nonprofit sector. So just wanted to acknowledge you on that.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it.
So I know that I asked you this question again before we started recording, but was there anything else in the background regarding if there was a single moment as the catalyst or if it was a series of events? Because it's like an
Um,
orchestra, like you had to align a lot of different pieces.
yeah, I mean, there was a single moment. I happen to be friends with the founding COO of Affirm, which is the largest buy now pay later company in the United States. And I was actually sitting in her office 7 years ago, learning about Affirm for the first time, not knowing much about the buy now pay later space. And as she was explaining it to me, she's now a good friend of mine, but as she was explaining it to me, I had this aha moment where I thought to myself, wow, why can't we apply this infrastructure, this credit infrastructure, this buy now pay later infrastructure to the largest underserved sector of finance in the world, which of course is the US philanthropic market. Instead of allowing somebody to buy now, pay later, allowing somebody to donate now, pay later, use the forces of financial technology and credit to help improve the world and make the world a better place, not just helping people buy another pair of jeans, but helping people finance that charitable contribution to the Red Cross because they made, there's a big earthquake in Haiti. And instead of giving $50, they might now say, you know what, I can give $150, but if I could only do it in $15 increments over 10 months. But the Red Cross doesn't need $15 a month. They need $150 now because they're responding to the crisis on the ground, right? So using this infrastructure, you can provide the nonprofits with the capital that they need now to respond to the problems they're doing, while at the same time not stressing the donor's bank account by A, allowing them to pay over time, and B, doing it completely for free. So I definitely had this thought, and that was really the first moment I ever thought of it, sitting in her office, listening to her explain what Affirm does, and realizing, wow, this can be used as a force for good. Now I'll tell you real quick, that was 7 years ago. That was 7 years ago. I only told a few people this idea, didn't tell too many other people this idea, and really kept it in my mind for 7 years before I decided, okay, this is, I'm going to fully act on this. And it's been an incredible journey. But when I look back on it, just to think that 7 years ago I had this idea and it took me 7 years to initialize it is it's kind of funny. But yeah, that was the moment. That was really the moment that I first had this concept.
Yeah, well, I think it's brilliant again because it's kind of like being the conductor of an orchestra. You've got to figure out how do you explain this concept to people. And I think you've raised something like 120 million in capital and so forth in venture capital. But also just how do you get all the different parties to work together? The flutes with the clarinets, the drums with the violins. I mean, I know that's a metaphor, but when you're sitting back from the eagle eye view and you're looking at it, it's kind of how do you make it all work? So you don't have to work
It,
18-hour days and everyone's playing nice.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I definitely I'm working 20-hour days these days. This is a very brutal endeavor to say the least, but it is a complex product. I mean, to your point, it involves nonprofits, it involves banks and credit, it involves our technology, it involves donors, right? You really have four parties to the transaction. You have the donor, you have the nonprofit, you have the lender, the bank, and then technology, which is us. So, and each of these parties has their own complexities, their own incentives, their own motivations, their own capital structures. So yeah, I mean, this is a very complex product to build. It took us 2 years to build it. It cost millions of dollars to build. Not easy to do. Definitely not easy to do.
Yes. Well, kudos again. So
Oh, thank you.
philanthropy is highly personal. So why does this idea work with all parties? And what I'm trying to get to is, are there certain sectors that care more or that give more, or how does religion play a part?
Yeah, I mean, philanthropy in general, I mean, so the biggest area of philanthropy in the United States is religious giving. First, I mean, by far, it's not even close. It's close to like one out of every $3 given philanthropically is given to a religious institution. After that, I believe it's education, which is around 15% of philanthropic giving. So education, universities, alumni schools, and so forth. And then it's social services like homeless services and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, those are the three biggest areas philanthropically. But I mean, the answer is, as you correctly pointed out, philanthropy is highly personal to people. And when you're building a product in the philanthropic space, what you have to understand is that everybody has a cause and everyone has something they care about, right? So if I were to stop, and we've run a lot of studies and tests on this, but when we run focus groups, we run surveys, but if I were to stop 10 people on the street and ask them, hey, what do you care about? What do you care about in the world outside of work and outside of your immediate family? And outside of your hobbies, what do you actually care about in the world? I would actually guarantee you that all 10 will have an answer of some substance, something. And most of the time it has to do with something they've been personally affected by. So, hey, my daughter has diabetes, so I care about diabetes. My mother had cancer, so I care about cancer. For me personally, I'm a dog lover. I love dogs. I'm an animal lover. I care tremendously about animals. I'm a donor to a lot of animal nonprofits. But my grandfather has Parkinson's, so I care about Parkinson's. But I had no connection to that cause before he got diagnosed. And now I care about Parkinson's, and I'm aware of what the latest research on Parkinson's is, right? So I think, we're all going to be affected by good and bad things in life, as is the planet. And people will generally gravitate viscerally and emotionally to things that they've been personally affected by. And in the United States, there's a strong legacy and a strong history of philanthropic giving, right? As I said, 72% of Americans give to charity, and the average donation in the United States is over $1,000. In fact, the average donation size in America is larger than the average e-commerce transaction. And Americans give away more than $1 billion per day in the United States, right? So I think when you're building products in this space, you have to meet donors where they're at, and you have to know that everybody has a cause. Philanthropy is incredibly personal, and you have to respect that when you're building a product in the space.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I wonder why Americans are so generous. If there's something about the culture or.
Well, I think it's two. I mean, the answer is, I think we know the answer. It's two reasons. One, America is a religious country, more religious than most other Western, more secular democracies. America
Founded on
sure
the Christian principles.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, America has a strong Judeo-Christian background. It's just a religious country in general, and religious giving is a huge component of giving. About 1/3 of philanthropic giving is religious. But it's two. So that's one for sure. But two, it's the second thing I was talking about. If you're in, Western Europe, you don't need to give philanthropically because your government probably provides the social services that you need in order to live. Whereas in the United States, we simply don't. And so nonprofits have sprung up to fill that gap, right? In most countries, in most, I would say, Western neoliberal democracies, which is what I'm specifically talking about, most of them provide an adequate social safety net for their citizens. And so there isn't a big philanthropic market because there doesn't need to be one. In the United States, we don't have that legacy. We have a legacy of limited government. And I'm not making a political judgment whether it's good or bad. I'm just stating the facts.
Obvious.
Yeah, and so we have a big philanthropic sector that has sprung up, as I mentioned earlier, to cover the social safety needs of the citizens. And because of that, Americans want to support organizations that help their community. If there's a big earthquake and the Red Cross comes in and helps with food and shelter and water, of course people in that community are going to want to support the Red Cross, right? So people will donate to the Red Cross, and that goes for every cause imaginable in every community. So I think that's the other reason Americans give back to the organizations that help them.
Sure. And we saw, we just spoke about the Red Cross, how much they helped with Hurricane Katrina and other weather disasters. I just find it interesting because on one hand, America gets quite involved with war, but on the other hand, the American people are so generous and caring.
They are.
Yeah.
The American people are more philanthropic than anybody else in the world. That's for sure.
Yeah, and as someone who has also lived abroad, I've lived like in 10 different locations growing up because of having a military parent. It's interesting. Americans will tell you more and then some.
That's true. That's very true. That's very true.
So in terms of stories, how have you seen this service help? Because I know that the facts really good. 1.7 million nonprofits in the US, the facts as if you're going to pitch me and I'm a venture capitalist. But I'm curious about some of the emotional stories of anything that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's take me for example. So this is just a personal story, but every year I donate to one of the leading Parkinson's research nonprofits out there because of my grandfather. And every year I give them, I'm philanthropically engaged in a variety of causes. I give quite a bit of money away to things I really care about. Mostly animals, some veterans causes, and then Parkinson's. But because of that, I'm limited in what I can give in any one sector. I can't give all my money away, so I give what I can give. But the idea that if I give, let's just say, $1,000 away to this Parkinson's organization every year, the idea that I can now give $2,000 away by giving, let's say, hypothetically, as an example, $200 a month. There's no interest, there's no cost, there's no fees to me. So I'm not incurring any cost to do this. And I can take that $2,000 and spread it out over 10 payments, for example. But I know that the Parkinson's organization that needs the money now actually gets the money now. That's a huge benefit to me, huge benefit, because I care about this organization. I want them to be capitalized. I want them to have the money they need to do the research. And they're of course thrilled because they say that, wow, Dominic usually gives us $1,000. Now I'm getting double that. I'm getting $2,000. And by the way, they're not even necessarily aware that I'm financing it. They're
Yeah.
just receiving the $2,000.
So you would say then from personal experience, you've seen the happiness in the eyes of your associates, the beneficiaries.
Oh, 100%. I had
Okay.
somebody one time. So here's a very particular story. One time somebody said to me, so one time somebody said, my friend's mother just passed away. And they called me up and they asked me if I would donate to a nonprofit that respects the legacy of this person's mother. And they said, at the time I didn't have, I think they said that they were unemployed or they just lost their job and they didn't have the money they wanted to donate. This was their best friend's mother, who had a strong, focus in a certain cause area. And this person had asked my friend to donate to their mother's charity, basically after she passed away. And my friend said, at the time I said to myself, I wish somebody would just lend me the money that I can do this. And this person said to me, your product, when it came out, allowed me to do exactly what I needed. You gave me the money completely for free. There's no interest, fees, or costs. I was able to give what I wanted to give to this person's mother's nonprofit to respect them. My friend was incredibly touched by the gesture and the gift. The nonprofit received the money, so they were obviously happy, and I got to pay it off over X number of months, and it didn't cost me anything to do it. So this person was extremely touched by the ability to do that. So yeah, I mean, I see people, being incredibly fulfilled by being able to use this product, because the reality is, and this is the last point I'll say on just this particular subject, which is that Fidelity Charitable put out a report last year called Overcoming Barriers to Charitable Giving. It was a very well-known report. And in the report, they did a study of American donors, and they concluded that 66% of American donors say they want to give more to their favorite nonprofit, but are currently unable to do so. You're talking about 2/3 of American donors say, I want to give more, but I'm currently not able to do so. This product that we've created, Donate Now, Pay Later, allows you to give what you want to give, not what you feel constrained to give, by allowing you to pay the donation off over time for free. And that is the core. That is how this provides true value to the donor and true happiness, by fulfilling the need or the want that people have to give what they want to give to their organizations that they care about.
Yeah. So I just wanted to highlight for a moment that I think that you're also referring to the peace of mind it gives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I find it also, I think in my research before today's episode, I think you said something like that those who can't give do want to give, and because they've been perhaps the recipient at one point in their life.
There's a lot of studies around people that have received benefits from the philanthropic market or from particular nonprofits, have oftentimes want to give more, to those nonprofits more than anybody, of course, because they've received benefit. And many times they can't, right? Or they can't give what they want to give. A significant number of Americans don't give to philanthropy. They think A, their gift is too small, or B, I can't give what I want to give. This product allows them to do that, and it doesn't charge them any money.
Yeah, and it allows them to be included
It does.
in that conversation.
Included in the legacy of giving, including in the American family of philanthropists, if you will. It allows anyone to be a philanthropist. This product does. Exactly.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So as we round out this conversation, this is where it gets a little personal. What would you like your legacy to be? And were there any role models? I think you talked about your father's influence in prior podcasts, your grandfather's. So what would you like your legacy to be?
Um, I would like my legacy to be that I worked really hard to try to improve the philanthropic sector in a meaningful way by creating innovative products in the space. And ultimately, I'd like my legacy to be that the products that I've created helped unlock billions of dollars of additional capital and liquidity for nonprofits, which trickle down into programs on the ground to help people. I believe in technology. I believe in the ability of using technology to create scale and massive change. And if you use technology appropriately and properly and ethically, which is what we're doing here, in a particular market like the nonprofit space, which is a huge market that is inefficient, you can unlock billions of dollars of additional liquidity through a product like Donate Now, Pay Later at scale. And hopefully the idea is that that money will trickle down to people on the ground doing the actual good work, helping communities, helping people in need. And that would be an incredible legacy. So I like that to be my legacy.
That's lovely. And for role models, was there anyone that you feel like set an amazing example, whether it's recent or past, historic?
There's definitely people that I look up to, for sure. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I have my, specific role models for sure. I'm sure, some of the top entrepreneurs of our day, I certainly look up to. You mentioned earlier, I look like Elon Musk a little bit. He's just as an entrepreneur, he's obviously someone who's been um, incredibly inspirational as an entrepreneur, looking at what he's built, the industries that he's innovated in. So, I certainly am fascinated by him and his journey and what he's been able to accomplish. And if I can accomplish, even, 1/10 of what he's done, I think it would be an incredible legacy to have.
Yes. Well, you can always joke that you're his cousin.
Exactly right.
You were the
Exactly.
English version. He was the South African version,
Yeah,
right?
totally, totally, totally.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I also just wanted to highlight for a moment regarding Mr. Musk. I think he said one time that he feels like his, what is it, the Boring Company? That's going to be his legacy. He doesn't
Oh
necessarily
yeah.
believe, yeah, which that's not a criticism or a
Yeah.
compliment to him. It just, it's a very interesting, perspective that he's like, but my products are my legacy. My
Right.
products are my contribution to society. Why do I have to go, above and
Right.
beyond?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think creative thinkers are important. I think the ability to think outside of the box to address problems, this kind of how we started out this podcast of, what are the present day problems, but also if we look at the direction of where we're going, what are some of the future problems that we can see
Yeah.
for society and humanity? And it's like, okay, please, somebody do something about it, or do I have to be the first?
Right. 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 Exactly. Yeah. Being the first in anything is very, very, very tough in anything. Right. And you just have to be prepared for a ton of criticism, a ton of pushback, a ton of no's. I've experienced all of that, in a tremendous amount, and anyone who has created anything new will experience that as well, for
Yes.
sure.
Well, I think that there was a story about the band Linkin Park. They were
Mhm.
rejected 99 times before they received their record label deal.
Yeah, there you go. J.K.
Yeah.
Rowling was famously rejected, many times with her manuscript. I could name a million actors and directors that have been rejected many, many times. I think if you're creating something, whether as an artist, like a book or a movie or a play, or as an entrepreneur, you're creating a product, rejection, I think there's a famous quote, but rejection is essentially a prerequisite for success. Yeah, I mean, you need to be rejected many, 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 many times to appreciate the true value of success. And happy to report that I've been rejected many times, and I'm sure I will continue to be in different areas. But you just takes one yes or someone to believe in you to, to back you to do what you need to do. So that's you just got to persevere and keep going.
Yeah, I think there's this expression about first they ridicule you, then they laugh at you, and then they agree with you.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's good. It's a good
Right.
one. Yeah.
So, in terms of your internal landscape, what values do you get to honor or any guiding principles?
So I think the golden rule, I mean, not to be biblical, but the golden rule is something that's important. Treat others the way you want to be treated. I think that's, a very, very good guiding principle in life. And you never know, um, the value of an interaction at first, but, so you want to treat everybody with respect. You want to treat everybody kindly. You want to treat everybody fairly. I've seen people, um, burn so many bridges with so many people by being rude, disrespectful, in a variety of ways, and then it comes back to haunt them later on, as significantly. And so you just have to always treat others with respect and treat others the way you want to be treated. It's cliche, but it's called the golden rule for a reason, because it does have a lot of value.
Yes. So maybe the values around fairness, equity, justice, compassion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all of those things, nominally are very good. I think it's the way that they're implemented is important. I don't believe in, um, I definitely don't believe in uh, forcing certain things upon people when they're not ready for them. I think our society has undergone incredible changes and shifts recently in the last 5 years, many of which I agree with and many of which I don't agree with. But I think, in general, if you treat people with respect and dignity and you treat them the way that you really would want to be treated, you really ask yourself, like, how would I feel if I was on the other end of this transaction or this other end of this interaction? I mean, I think society is suffering from a lack of empathy. We have a huge lack of empathy in society, on all sides of the political spectrum. And I think, that's a huge problem too. So being empathetic to, your fellow human being is a huge thing, and really putting yourself in their shoes when you're dealing with somebody else.
Yeah, well, I applaud your compassion and empathy again, that you can put yourselves in the shoes of those who want to give, who can't. And yet this allows an open door so that they don't get either left behind or excluded, because again, everyone wants to feel that they belong in a community. And if they've got the heart to give, now they've got the means to do that with
Exactly
your
right.
product.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's a great way to
So
put it.
as we wrap, is there any particular call to action, or would you just like to share your website?
Sure, I'd love to share it. So it's the letter B and then the word generous. So begenerous.com. And certainly if you're a nonprofit that would find value in our product, we'd love to talk with you. And if you're a donor who wants to use our product, also you can come check it out, what we're doing. We have a direct to consumer product as well that's launching pretty soon. So we'd love to share our technology with any nonprofit or donor who's interested to learn more. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Dominic Kalms with a K, and would love to connect with you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Dom, for your time this morning. Thank you for joining from New York City and speaking into your legacy that you're creating. I think that you're not only a positive role model for anyone who's listening, but I think specifically also within the millennial generation. You're working hard, breaking through any stereotypes that exist out there to show that you're willing to put in the sweat equity and do the hard work.
Yeah, I'm definitely trying. I appreciate, having the opportunity to speak with you and share my story with your listeners as well. So thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it, and hopefully it was interesting for you as well.
Very much so. So I'm just going to close this out with my paragraph. So if
All
you'll
right.
just stand by for a moment. So
Sure.
in closing, I'm Angelina Carlton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you for joining us today. And if you're listening on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, to rate and review. Thank you for joining us this week. And thank you, Mr. Kalms, for being an excellent guest speaker.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.